This episode is sponsored by the Cedar City Business and Innovation Center, dedicated to supporting local businesses and entrepreneurs. It provides resources and services aimed at fostering business creation, growth, and retention. The center features the makerspace, where entrepreneurs and small businesses can have access to 3D printers, video production, and photography equipment, t-shirt printing, and more. Whether you're starting a new venture or looking to expand an existing one, the Cedar City Business and Innovation Center offers the tools and guidance to help you succeed. To learn more and get involved, visit innovationcenter.cc. Welcome to Explore Local Podcast, a weekly audio show presented by Visit Cedar City Bryan Head and Cedar City Iron County Economic Development. I'm David Johnson. I'm the Economic Development Director for Cedar City and Iron County. And this show is produced by Dallas Smith Media. And today we've got a couple guests here that I am really excited to have on the podcast. They're with BZI, also known as Building Zone Industries, right?
That's right.
So we have James Barlow, who's the Chief Executive Officer, and we have Tom Harker, who's our Chief Operating Officer for BZI. And so we're just going to kind of jump into things. BZI, it used to be BZI Steel, focused a lot on steel erection, but let's start off by just talking about the broad scope of who is BZI, and today, who are you and what are you doing? And then we'll backtrack a little bit in how you got started.
Sure. So BZI is a construction company, primarily. We touch a lot of different types of, we'll call it scopes of operation. Started as a steel erector. We now have a fabrication operation. In some of the development that has happened over the last few years, we've added the BZI Innovation Park as one of our project initiatives. It's so we're functioning as a developer. We have a general contracting component to what we do, and even rail service. All of it integrates in a way to provide an experience to our clients. We work nationwide in industrial markets, doing what we call core and shell construction operations. So this would be structural steel and wall systems. Could include insulated metal panel walls or casted walls, precast, tilt wall, those kinds of things.
Awesome. And so here in Iron County, you have what they call the BZI Innovation Park, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little about the Innovation Park. How big is it? What's the intent with that Innovation Park? It's out west.
Mm-hmm.
It's a few miles west of Cedar City, right?
Yeah.
Off of Highway 56, past the Y.
Yeah. So the story behind the park is kind of a comical one because you know how things, they just develop. Some things are meant to be, perhaps. I don't know. So a couple of years ago, we were looking for 40 acres on the rail to do an expansion for our fabrication operations and to consolidate our offices. And we could not find 40 acres on the rail. We found 400 acres on the rail. So we thought, okay, a little more than we asked for, but
just a couple extra zeros or whatever.
But maybe there's some opportunity to be had here.
Yeah.
The rail was really important because we were freighting in a lot of steel, and there's no transload facilities in southern Utah. So we were railing steel into Phoenix and Salt Lake City and then transporting it by truck into Cedar City. We'd fabricate it and then ship it out, right? So the rail was important. It's here, but no services to take delivery of materials here. So we just thought, well, we'll just put our facility on the rail. That way we can serve ourselves, right? Well, once we saw that we couldn't procure 40 acres on the rail, we could procure 400. We just thought, well, maybe what Cedar City needs is maybe there are others that need a transload facility. So we went ahead and secured 400 acres. But once we identified, what we needed, we went ahead and bought the other 400 acres next to it as well. So we're sitting
might as well throw that in, right?
We're sitting at 820 acres. We figured, hey, look, some people say go big or go home.
Right.
We say go big and bring it home, right? So
I like that.
We went ahead and took a shot. we realized we were making a long play for Cedar City in our area, but we're very, very intentional about investing into the community, and we see the opportunity to diversify the economic strength of our community in doing so. So we went ahead, secured the property, and launched a rail service. So our transload facility, RailSync, serves more than just ourselves. It's serving other users across the community, primarily dimensional products, do a lot of lumber imports, as well as steel. But today, we're now engaging in investments to build out phase one infrastructure, and we're making pretty good progress on a 65,000 square foot warehouse that's subdivisible for business units, right?
And this is concrete tilt up, right?
Concrete tilt up product. We're actually using the property now, and it's part of why we named it the BZI Innovation Park, because our intention is, as developers and construction company as we are, to use the park as a sandbox for further innovation. So we're testing a brand new proprietary process that we've developed with Innovatech, our innovation arm, for casting wall sections and installing them there at the park. In the first building, we call it Nautilus 1, is the first product with the InnovaCast system.
So I'm glad you brought this up because, I started as the economic development director last fall of 23. And one of the things that I constantly tell people about BZI is if there's something they need and it doesn't exist, they just start another company, right? and that's pretty much what RailSync was, right? Hey, we need transload. It's costing us a ton of money to rail it and then truck it. We just need to rail it straight here. So what do you do? Well, let's start RailSync. Might as well, right? And I'm being a little flippant about that, but like I love that mentality. So same thing with the InnovaCast. You're doing this concrete tilt up, but you've built almost like a giant 3D printer, so to speak, where you're just pouring the concrete. I've been out there and I was just blown away. I'm thinking, what in the world? I feel like I'm looking at a 3D printer just blown up, and you're making this tilt up and you're working out all the kinks. But the Nautilus project, it's kind of your, like you said, sandbox. It's kind of your testing ground, right? Yeah. Before you start putting out a InnovaCast and using it for clients, you're saying, hey, we're going to proof it first here, right?
Yep. And the reason this is so important is in the construction industry, especially if you're going to invest into new process, the R&D, those kinds of things, you can't go market something without proving it out entirely. Yeah. And so what we're trying to do is make sure, and this is consistent with other innovations we've done, where we've tested it here locally. We've, with our other erection methods, we've done test facilities locally that's all they were designed for, is just to prove this process so that we could take it out and market it. And so the whole BZI Innovation Park, part of our vision with that is creating a place that even other companies can come and join us in testing their innovations in our park, if that's of interest to them.
Right. I love that. Now I want to take a step back to a comment that you made a little bit earlier. I loved it because that's really where I want to go next. And then I want to circle back to the innovation because there's so many innovations that we can talk about. But you said that your approach is to go big and bring it home.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love that. So what I want to do is I want to take a step back now and let's talk about the early days of BZI. Let's talk back. Today, how many employees do you guys have right now?
We're sustaining over 700 employees now.
And how long has BZI been around now?
Well, we started in 2006 out in Barlow, Utah.
Okay, yep. So talking 18 years. And how many employees, let's start with that, did you have when you start? How many people were working doing this steel erection?
5. I think we're going to have to let Tom tell the early days stories.
Tom, that's where we dive to you. Let's talk about those early days.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having us. And maybe to get kicked off from the early days, I think it's probably a good idea to bring some context to what the background was to the environment at the time. So
absolutely.
I grew up on a third generation farm. At some point, the farm was growing and no longer could sustain all the people that were there. So in the early days, we would pick up random side jobs for other farmers, build them a hay shed, build them a barn, build them some corrals, a shop, different things like that. And so as we got somewhat established, it's like, hey, let's do other things as well. We would build implements that did not exist. And in that environment, a lot of times you have time, but no money. So it kind of forced a pretty creative mindset to begin with. If we didn't have the tools, we would build the tools,
Right.
We didn't have a lot of conveniences that you have today, like man baskets and different things, boom lifts. We would build an attachment for the loader to, move our personnel around back in the early days. So that kind of gives us some context to where we started from. So in 2006, we actually formed the company of BZI. And from there, for many years, we just did pre-engineered metal buildings. At the time, we would do the concrete, the dirt, fabricate the building, buy the skin, and build the building. And then
it was just 5 of you.
That's basically where it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a few of us. And then, in that environment, we would, during harvest time, we would go help harvest, and then back at the steel construction.
Back to the side hustle, right? Yeah.
Anyway, so as it kind of evolved, it really just stood it up to where it became more and more independent from the farming operations. And we slowly worked ourselves up market, got into more commercial stuff, and created some good relationships with people like Walmart, built many Walmarts across the nation, and then slowly grew, got into more of the big box market about 2011-12 era, into the distribution centers. And that gives you kind of some context on where we started from.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love the story. If you got some local farm boys, right, who are just kind of like I said a minute ago, almost kind of had a side hustle. You had to do some steel erection for yourself, and your neighbors are saying, hey, we could use some of that too. And so you're picking up some business. And, I feel like that's kind of part of the American story, right? Is a lot of times you're low on means or resources. So you have to be innovative and creative. You figure something out and you realize, hey, we've got a niche here that's meeting a need that no one else is meeting. Right. And so then you kind of find a nice little segue. I love that you talked about starting to move into those big boxes. There's a story, and we talked a little bit about this before we jumped on. I love the story of I think it was a grocery store where you had to weld something up on the ceiling, but it was during business hours and you couldn't dangle cable. So tell that story. I just absolutely love the creativity, because to me, this epitomizes that innovative nature, as well as some professional lessons learned in that situation.
Sure. I'll jump into that one. So to bring some context to that, there was a proprietary contract with a large retailer where we were going into hundreds of stores and doing some enhancements on their buildings. So part of this would require stringing leads through their buildings, working with their customers, and you're working above their product. When we first got into it, it was a very undesirable thing to do. Well, a few weeks into it, and with all the cord management and different things, it's like, oh man, there's got to be a better way. So I remember it's actually my brother Jim. He's kind of a brainy guy, and he's like, how would it be if there's a cordless welder? It's like, your natural reaction is like, how would it be if you could fly to the moon overnight? It's
cordless welder, right?
Just kind of way out there. Anyway, fascinatingly enough, a couple of evenings later, we were doing night shifts. So during the day, we would go fiddle on these things. Anyway, a couple of nights later, we had a shopping cart full of batteries and wires and an inverter.
Like car batteries?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just a bunch of 12-volt batteries, all wired together with, an inverter system and a little welder on there. And anyway, we're just like, hey, let's go try this out, Yeah. Anyway, so we go rolling in there, and the store manager, he shut that down right away. Thought we were some terrorists rolling in to blow up his store. Anyway, as it turns out, that was the beginning stages of what we call today the mobile arc, is what it is. It's on a cart, and it has batteries and an inverter. And is what that allows you to do is actually have a cordless welder that we ended up building a hitch system that hooked to our scissor lift that you could literally pull this around throughout the store.
Wow.
What could have taken 2 days to string the wires and leads through the ceiling, now you have instant power wherever you are. You drive in there, and 3 minutes later, you're ready to weld.
That is nuts.
There's a few really big lessons that we learned that day. One is, hey, you can change the world. You can change the game. And just because it seems like a far out idea does not mean it's not possible. Sure, it's going to take some effort, and it was a long journey to get us where we are today. But a few of the other, I'll call them key lessons that we learned there is, it's one thing to, we'll call it practically be able to do something. It's another to have it accepted in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So that night, not only did we learn that it was possible to have a cordless welder, but also the value of having a professional product and how you go about that approach.
Right.
At the end of the day, you could have the exact same components, and the only difference is the way that it's presented is either a deal or a no deal. So we learned that the value of the first impression is also the best impression.
Mm-hmm.
So today, we also change the world in different things, but we've baked into that process the professionalism, the backing behind it, the manuals, all those things. And to James's point earlier, with the BZI Innovation Park, that's why that's so critical for us, is we can go out there on our own projects where we're managing those risks, and we can prove that concept and then take the data and go to the customer and say, hey, this is what we have to offer, and this is all the data that backs that, and this is how much time or money or whatever it can save you. So that was a really fun story to be a part of. At the time, it was relatively stressful.
Yeah.
But
so I just have this picture when you talk about rolling into this, store with a shopping cart full of batteries, and I can imagine the poor manager thinking, "What am I about to confront here?" Right? Like, if you looking at that, obviously that was one of those lessons you learned about professionalism. So when you evaluated that after, what went through your guys' mind of, hey, this is what we need to do differently? And what did you decide were those processes in interacting with those customers that you would do differently?
Sure. So it's like a lot of things. You don't know what you don't know. And I would say at the time, with our level of professionalism,
Mm-hmm.
If I was to go back and articulate the feelings and thoughts that were going through my mind, is it's kind of like, these guys are unreasonable. Why does life have to be so political?
Right.
And all these things, and quite a bit of almost resentment, like, why are they not workable? Do they not realize that this can save them so much time and risks, right?
Yeah.
But like a lot of things, challenges in our world are really based off the mindset that we choose to adopt. They can be stepping stones or stumbling blocks. And it's
Right.
things like that where we had to intentionally decide, we are going to use this opportunity to help us to level up.
Mm.
So we basically had to be intentional, and we says, we're going to play the long game, and we're going to figure it out. And the truth of the matter is, it was like a 6 or an 8-month process of submitting this thing back and forth and redesigning and building protective covers and all the things to actually get it approved.
Yeah.
So it was not like a quick overnight thing where you
Right.
went and built a better cart. We had to take it to the next level. That was the first time in our lives we had to create a manual. It's like, here, dude, how hard can it be? It's a battery,
Right. Yeah.
Look, it makes a weld.
Right.
But
Yeah.
no, the customer, they wanted proof. They
Right.
wanted data.
Right. So did you guys get a patent on this?
So I think eventually we did end up patenting it,
Yeah.
but it was, I think the biggest key takeaways for us was the mindset
Right.
that it helped provide for us. And it empowered us to say, hey, we can change the world.
Yeah.
And if anything, it built confidence that next time somebody says, oh, you can never do that,
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, well, maybe, but maybe we can.
So I really love where you're going with this, because I think some people may hear the story that, yeah, you built this cool new wireless welder, and people that aren't, in the industry are probably naive to how cool that really is, right? And the efficiencies that it creates. But I'm sure some people might look and think, what do you mean change the world? You just built another tool, right? Like, how are you changing the world? But what I'm getting out of what you're saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the focus is more not necessarily the tool that you created, but the mindset that helped you get there, right? I love what you were saying about initially you're thinking back that manager, you're like, what's his problem? We're trying to do this more efficiently, more effectively. And I think we just have, as a human nature, is to kind of take that tendency. But it makes me think back to something I always heard professionally and growing up is you can't change others. You can only change yourself. Right.
Sure.
And so I love that message. And I feel like that's what I was getting to earlier when I was talking about BZI and your innovation. You could have just, said, the situation of no transload facility here, it's going to make it so we can't move forward with BZI. Like, it's just our numbers aren't going to crunch. So, you know what, hands in the air, let's go back to the farm, boys, right? But that's not what you did, right? So this makes me want to kind of transition a little bit. Because you said you started getting into the big boxes around 2011, 2012, right?
Yeah.
And then you started building like quite a few, I think. And then James, you've talked about this in conversations that you and I have had before. And you were doing a lot of Amazon facilities and a lot of those big facilities, and things were going well. I don't know if you
that really took off in about, I would say 2017 was kind of a launch year for our team into
so it was
that.
kind of this progression from these big boxes into doing these big Amazon facilities. So talk about that. Talk about how you got there and then some of the hurdles that you had to go through.
Yeah. In 2016, we saw a pretty seismic shift in the market. And I think a lot of people in construction participated in this, but the online retail really started to take off. Amazon was leading the charge, obviously. And brick and mortar stores in the retail segment was kind of our primary bread and butter through that window. And all of those stores came to a halt. So this would be Walmart, Kroger, Menards, many of these big, large retailers literally just came to a screeching halt. And
interesting.
So we were in a bit of a crisis. We pivoted hard. We had done a few large distribution centers, so we had a foundation to spring from, and we had already developed the panel table, at least the first generation unit. And so we had something to start with, and we saw that was the segment that was in motion. So we made a hard lunge into that space, and over the next 3, 4, 5 years, that really became we'll say 100% of our work was centered in that market segment.
Let's back up. Let's explain what the panel table is and how you came up with that, and then let's dive back into that 100% of your work and how things even changed after that again, right?
Sure.
So
I'd say the panel table is, after the mobile arc, it was probably the most significant innovation that really shaped the future of the business. And I think the story of the first panel table has a lot of similarities to the mobile arc story, but I wonder if, Tom, maybe you ought to tell us that story.
So why don't you describe what the panel table is and what was its purpose?
Sure. So to bring some context and lay the foundation for this, we'll call it a traditional erection. The way that you build a building is typically one joist at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So in simple terms, you would stand columns, girders that support the joists, and then one joist at a time. Then you would bridge the joists, and then you would get up exposed to that fall up at the roof height, and then one piece of deck at a time. Then you're going to deck this. Okay, so it was what we did, because we were just these farmers that didn't know better. It's like, hey, how would it be if you built these sections, and instead of all these picks, it might be 8 or 10 picks up into the air and fasten them? Why wouldn't we just build a panel and then do one pick? And then you're reducing all that risk. And instead of everybody having to be up on the roof being tied off,
right,
where you're less versatile, then you could do that all at the ground under 6 feet, where you don't need to be tied off and you're not exposed to those falls, and you're much more efficient down on the ground.
So you're building them like in a modular fashion, right, on the ground.
Yeah. So in simple terms, our first job, we literally just built this little jig, and all it did is had 2 rails with joist pockets on it. And you would set the joists in, and then you'd do the bridging down there, and then you'd hand deck it still at that time, and then you'd crane this section up. Well, all the people in the industry at that time, when we talked to them about it, they're like, oh, you can never get everything to be straight and square. Like that'd be a waste of your time. You can't panelize with deck. But we were basically probably too hard-headed to think that we couldn't and listen.
Right.
So it's true. It's not particularly the easiest thing to do, especially getting into it, but we really dialed the process in and got very efficient at it. And along the way, it's like, okay, now that we can panelize, now how would it be if we added components to the panel table? So initially it was just a skid. You'd have to get a couple of forklifts and move it every time you needed to move it. You could build like 5 or 6 panels in the radius of the crane. Then you'd have to move your whole system, which was quite a bit of work, but we figured it out. So our first job was like that. And then the second job, it's like, hey, we really have something going here. Let's add some features. So we added we actually rebuilt the panel table, a whole new table. And it's like, let's put casters on it so you can just roll it around, especially if it's on concrete. And then let's add a gantry arm that actually carries your deck for you.
Wow.
And so it's like, oh, that makes all the difference in the world. And then by the end of that job, we actually added a drive system to the panel table to where it can drive by itself now.
Right.
So it really just kind of evolved one thing after another. And so that's kind of the story of the panel table.
Yeah. Well, and your passion just telling that story, it makes me go like, oh, I want to get in construction now. Like, I don't know.
I want to build something.
Yeah, I want to build something, but my visions are of me like with Legos as a child, and stuff. But that's about the extent that I got. But yeah, I mean, it's just so cool to see the passion in your face, and you can hear it in your voice about, hey, we're going to do this a little bit differently. And honestly, and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm minimizing your story, but it does remind me of like when I was a kid and I would build something and I'd go like, Mom, Dad, look at this thing, this thing's so awesome. Matter of fact, I got to tell you a digressive story. I did that one time with Legos and my dad asked me, he's like, I just built some weird contraption. I can't believe I'm telling the story. And my dad asked me, he's like, well, what is it, son? And I'm like, I look at it and I'm probably 6. I'm like, it's a donkey donger. And to this day, we still don't know where I got that from. But my dad loves to tease me that my greatest creation was a donkey donger. So put that on the record.
I think it's hilarious that you bring up Legos because we've used the context of Legos so much in our conversations about what we actually do in business.
Yeah.
We play big boy Legos. We use that terminology all the time.
Oh, that's great because that's exactly the visions that I'm having.
And
with these
it does
modular
characterize the we'll call it the joy of our industry.
Yeah,
creating things.
Right.
And there's really nothing like it.
Yeah. So okay, now we've talked a little bit about this transition, and now you're doing these big boxes, and you're revolutionizing how you're doing this still erection and the panels. And now let's get into, this was 100% of your business.
Yeah.
And it was fairly lucrative for you as a business, but then you ran into some hurdles, right? You ran into some economic hurdles, right?
Yeah. Well, so everybody in the last few years has seen some seismic hurdles in business, starting with the pandemic in 2020.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the pandemic really accelerated the online retail process or adoption at large. So through 2020 and 21, we were crazy busy. And so we didn't experience what a lot of companies did in the pain and suffering that occurred at a large scale through the 2020 pandemic period. Ours really was kind of like an aftershock, and it was in 2022 when basically Amazon, who was our largest client, we didn't work directly for them, but they were the owner of most of the structures we were building for the general contractors that we serve. And we were pretty much 100% segmented to the warehouse distribution e-commerce segment. And Amazon made up about, 80% of our work.
Wow.
So pretty sizable.
You had a lot of eggs in that basket.
And they pivoted on their strategy. The markets had changed sufficiently that they did a big drawback in 2022. And that kind of forced us back into that same headspace as we were in 2016. We had to reinvent ourselves, basically. And we needed new clients. We needed to diversify. And it was we lost 30% of our revenues in that year. So at the point that they had drawn that, they'd done their project cancellations. They literally canceled over 40 projects across the nation. We were on a handful of those. But we worked really hard through 2022 to get our footing and posted about a 30% reduction in revenues from 21 to 22.
So how did you, now were you CEO at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
About what year did you come in?
I joined the company in 2015.
2015. Okay. All right. So how did you, with this 30% reduction, how did you pivot? And what went through your mind on how do we move forward when we have this pretty big loss, when things were going super?
We had so much momentum, we literally went off
just
the
like
cliff,
brakes
right?
all of a sudden, right? So much momentum, you didn't have brakes to stop before the
That's
cliff
correct.
almost, right? Yeah. So how did you pivot with that?
We pulled our team together. We concluded early on that we were not going to do any layoffs. We were going to continue to play long. We focused on our client relations and followed many of our clients into industries that they may have had engagement with. So by the time 2022 was over, we had repacked our backlog, and now we were serving markets like the electric vehicle manufacturing. We were in microchip manufacturing. We had engaged pretty deeply into food and beverage and other industrial type projects, data centers, and so on. And so we repacked our backlog with new project types and a lot of new clients.
There's one thing, and so I've worked in private, nonprofit, public sectors, and there's one theme that I think it carries no matter what sector you're in. It's having a diversified portfolio. So even if you're a niche manufacturer or a producer or a service, you still have to have a level of diversification in your revenue streams, in your clientele, right? Because like, for example, nonprofits that are dependent on one or two big donors, well, if that donorship, dries up, so does their organization, right?
Yep.
And so, when I hear you talk about all these different types of businesses, basically what I hear is you saying, hey, look, we had a lot of eggs in one basket, and we've got to look. There's other opportunities and there's other industries that need the services that we provide. So I want to maybe pivot here now and talk a little bit about, and I want to get back to some of the cool innovations too.
Yeah.
But I like what you guys, what you were saying about no layoffs. I like what you're saying about bringing it home. There's something that I really like that you guys have done, and you've created an academy, right?
Yeah.
And you have employees across the whole nation, right? But you've created an internal academy training for your employees. Talk a little bit about that. Tell me about that. Tell me about partnerships that you have to make that happen. I don't know who.
Absolutely. So I'll lead out. Maybe Tom can chime in here on some of these. Steel Tech is so we call it Steel Tech Academy. That is our training center. The idea for Steel Tech really evolved from about 2017 through 2019 into 20. By the time we were into 2020, we were doing, we had internalized a number of classes and courses that we were doing to level up our team sets. A lot of them are really around safety and
that's what I was going to say.
skills.
So some of this academy was driven by we want to be the safest, right? And there's a little backstory, and continue about the Steel Tech Academy, but I also want to hear kind of that backstory of why safety became such a core value with BZI.
Absolutely. Well, it all ties to the aggressive growth from 2017 through 2020. For perspective, we literally went from $25 million a year in 2017 to $290 million in 2021. So in 5 years, we more than 10x the organization. And so that really put a lot of stress on certain aspects of the business, and safety was one of them, because we work at heights and we have a lot of exposure, and we even suffered some incidents that drove us to continue to go deeper and deeper with our team on how to become a safer organization. A lot of our innovations are targeting safety enhancements, and so one of the most significant changes you can make to improve safety is to engineer out the hazard, which we were doing through our modular process, working on the ground, et cetera. But there's also a lot of investment that has to be made in safety culture. People have to think safely. They have to develop hazard awareness. We'll call it muscle or competencies. And so the drive toward Steel Tech really evolved and was centered around improving the safety of our team members, as well as increasing their technical competencies as a steel erector and the certifications that back that. We launched Steel Tech in 2021. That was really that was really the first year that we formalized it, dedicated resources to it, and had a dedicated team set that their job was Steel Tech Academy.
And this is when you were having that positive.
And we were
right?
we were scaling very quickly. Going back to what it means to do 25 million to 290 million. We went from like 100 team members in 2016, 2017 to 450 team members in 2021. So
that's crazy.
There was a lot of momentum there, right?
I'm sure HR loved the paperwork, right?
Yeah. You're looking at him.
That's awesome.
Steel Tech really evolved through that, and then we began to leverage it more deeply in ways that we could enhance training, level up not just the initial training subject matter, but also kind of now today, we have professional development courses, communication, et cetera, those kinds of programs that are all part of the program through partnerships with SUU as well as Southwest Tech.
That's awesome. All right, so he's given kind of high level about the name the school Steel Tech Academy. Give me a little bit of the nitty gritty.
Sure. So to bring a little bit of context to this, I remember early on when you're bringing on a guy or two, we'll call it a month, then it's pretty easy to just take somebody with very low training and maybe you put them through some basic training just to be compliant. So a third party OSHA 10 would be an example of that. And then really they just go to the job and the leadership on the job would help mentor and train them. Right. Well, that works when you're growing at 1 or 2% or something like that. But when you are aggressively growing, then we found that when you're already tapped out with your leadership in the field, the last thing they need is a bunch of new guys to try to train and get them oriented and understand the culture and what we're even doing. So I remember early on having the conversations with James. We were doing some big jobs in California, and we were just having some problems down there. The regulations were really strict, and we're just throwing more and more people at it. But we identified, it's not that we need more people; we need more competent people.
Right.
And so I remember personally having that mental mindset shift that says, you know what? For us to really get where we need to be, we need to go and take ownership of the training, which means up until that time, to give you some perspective, our highest quality people were on the front lines every single day. And it's for us to take this where we need to go, we need to take some of our best people and put them over a training facility. And at the time, that was actually not a common idea.
Really?
But we made that investment and brought some of our very best people that are capable of running big jobs. And it's no, we want them to come here and mentor these people. And so it started out with, hey, let's at least get them oriented with our culture, right? Simple things like an OSHA 10. We would in-house that training, an OSHA 30, fall protection, forklift, boom lift training, all these things. And let's add weld training. At the time, we would outsource even our certifications. But once we kind of got some momentum behind it, we started adding on components like welding and bolting. And today, it's much more advanced, a lot of technical skills. and even soft skills that go into the culture and what's expected of people that work within the organization, how to bring solutions, right? It's kind of a tough thing. How do you train that, right?
Right.
And it's like, for us to do justice to what we can do in the industry, we have to control the culture and the training. And to James's point earlier, we hire from nationwide. So if we hire somebody from North Carolina, we will fly them here to our training facility. We're paying them. We're got them a room and board, and a basic training consists of about a 2-week process where they'll come in. They could have very little or no construction experience. By the time they go, they would have an OSHA 10, know how to drive a forklift, a boom lift, have a weld certification, as well as fall protection, and at least have a basic idea of what this industry even is.
Right.
As well as like understand what's expected at a culture level.
Right.
Like just because it was fine for them to, let's say, for example, show up late at their earlier job, if they know that it's expected of them to show
Right
up
up
on
front.
time every single time,
Yep.
now the front lines, they may have to tune the process with the person, but the basic foundational elements are already in place.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, with Steel Tech, that was kind of the initial intent. Now we can leverage that even further as we create new machines, processes, systems. That gives us a foundational base to work from that we can train new ideas. And the new machines that we bring, it creates new hazards.
Yeah.
It shifts the environment. So it gives us something to work with to train people on.
Right.
So we found that it's like a lot of innovations that we do. There's an initial reason that we do it, but as we get into it, there's so many ways that we can leverage it to even bring more and more value. And so today at Steel Tech, we're partnered with people like SUU. I was out there today, and there's a big crowd of people going through getting like an OSHA 30 that don't even work for us. So as a community, that's also become a great resource to elevate the entire industry, which we're really proud of.
Yeah. So, man, you've given me so many thoughts too and directions I want to go. I do want to highlight. I want to get to that community element that you're just talking about too. But first, I really want to highlight. You brought up OSHA, and anyone in construction, heck, anyone who has employees with any kind of sniff of a safety hazard dreads OSHA, right? That's just kind of the mentality of like, oh no, OSHA, you know. But what I love, what I think I hear you saying is, we take OSHA standard and we go above and beyond. So if OSHA steps foot, we're going to be like, hey, come on over and let me show you this, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about that mentality, the lessons learned by when you built that wireless
mobile arc.
Yeah, the mobile arc, the wireless welder, right? You learn, you can have this attitude of, hey, they're standing in my way, they're preventing efficiencies, or you could say, you know what? I can't change that, but I can change what I'm doing, right?
Exactly my point. And maybe just to elaborate a little bit more on that, more than just the practical elements of building a building, I think the most special thing we have is our team and our ability to adapt.
Yeah.
So to your point, using the example of OSHA, initially in context of the mobile arc, it's like, why is this so hard? But once we embrace the idea that we are dedicated and we're going to make it happen,
right?
Then we had to internalize and realize we need training, we need documentation.
Mm-hmm.
That's no different than out in the field today. When we first got into the big markets, I remember the conversations of, why do we have to be tied off? Why are they being so hard on us about this?
Mm-hmm.
And why do they need safety glasses and face shield and steel-toed boots and cut level 3
That's
gloves?
dumb, yeah.
And all these things. But today, it is easy and it's simple. It's not hard to comply. But guess what? We have a foundation to support that. Somebody that comes into training, they walk out the door with a harness, with a lanyard, with the gloves, with the hard hats, with the glasses, with everything they need. And it's very easy to be successful when you're supported. And we'll call it the physical things are one side, but the culture that supports it. So out on the front lines, our team leaders are putting an emphasis on safety. And it's true, we need to bring that into balance with production. But when you're supported to do it right safely,
Yeah.
it's very easy and it's actually pretty natural to do it.
Right.
But it's when you're trying to do something that you're not supported in doing, that's when it's hard.
Yeah.
When you don't have the foundation to work from, when you don't have the safety training and the safety culture
Right.
and the safety reps on site and the tools and equipment to do it safely, that's when it becomes problematic.
Right. It's funny too how in different industries, if it's part of your culture, it's not a big deal. If it's not part of your culture, it's like the world is turning over. This,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're changing the status quo, right? I mean, you have to give my microcosm analogies, but it makes me think like when I was a kid, I would ride my BMX bike, skateboard, rollerblades. I remember one time my mom came home, got out of the car, and I'm like, "Mom, watch this." And as she turned, I was going off a ramp, jumping over 5 garbage cans, right? No helmet, no pads, no nothing. I'm like, I'm like an 80s kid, I'm hardcore. But my kids, you better believe they're wearing helmets and all the things. And it's funny because I always worried that my kids would be like, "Oh, I feel so stupid." But the other day, one of my teenagers said, I asked, "Oh, did you wear your helmet when you rode your bike or whatever?" And they're like, "Of course." They're like, it's like not wearing your seatbelt. It feels weird to not have it on." And I realized when she said that I had created this culture, hopefully a positive culture, not like a guilt trip culture. You know what I mean? And when I hear you talking about that, it makes me think it's so easy if it's just a commonplace thing that you do every day, like tying your shoe. You get up, you tie your shoe. You get up, you put on your vest, you put on your glasses, you put on your hard hat, and whatever equipment, your steel toe boots, whatever you need. And that's just part of the process. I also love what you were saying about pulling in your best to do the training. I remember there was an environment that I was in at one time, and while the people doing the training were the old status quo guys who've been doing it the same way for so long and teaching just horrible habits that broke the rules and did all these things. And finally I said to an upper of mine, I said, you really need to take these guys that are maybe younger, but doing it really well and hitting all those marks you need, pull them in, have them do the training. And, of course, some of the old status quo guys didn't like that. But guess what? The efficiencies, the effectiveness was far better than where it was before, right? And so on that note, I want to touch on, you guys don't just practice safety, but you recently received some significant awards in safety. I don't know if you want to hit on that, James.
I do want to hit on it, and I want to back up just a touch and talk about the safety culture here for a second, because that was in the industry historically, BZI was largely kind of known for its innovation. And the thing that many people don't understand is that this is a personal belief of mine from the experience that I've had here, is that the growth and the development of our safety culture and the transformation we've experienced in that regard is as significant as any of our innovations. And I say that because to your point, making a cultural change or a cultural transformation is so difficult. But coming off of the farm, the maverick, the farmer approach, as it's characterized, is so different from the very sophisticated and deeply oriented safety programs that we navigate today.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't come like all at once, right?
Sure.
It took a while.
There's growing pains, right, in these things.
There was a project that we were under a tremendous amount of pressure on because of our safety, where we pulled our whole team together and we drew a line in the sand and basically said, "Look, guys, if we want to build pole barns for the rest of our lives, and we want to act the way we are right now, where we don't value safety, where we're not going to follow these rules or that compliance, then we can go and get more pole barn projects, but the business isn't going to grow anymore. It's done. We're done.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna downsize, and we'll go back to building pole barns. If it's our intention to truly change the industry, which we had committed ourselves to, we felt like our innovations gave us that momentum to do so, but we didn't want to change our safety culture. We just wanted everybody to accept us the way we were.
Right.
And coming to grips with the reality that we can't change an industry if we're not willing to change first.
Mm-hmm.
And the change we needed to make was our safety culture. And that gave us credibility and relevance.
Mm-hmm.
The industry would not accept our innovations if we weren't a credible contributor to the industry.
Right. If you
And
were
so
just this rogue company off to the side, right?
Exactly. So it really set the trajectory of change for us. And I would just say that it was very significant, but it became the catalyst for a lot of change in quality control, in not just our safety culture, but in terms of meeting compliance standards, but how we care about each other.
Yeah.
And the community that we've built. And I would say that's as significant as anything in our history.
Right. You know, what I love too in hearing you say that is you were able to add on this safety component and these professional components, but not lose sight of your roots. And what I see in roots, especially, farm boys and, those guys that are out there, mechanics that working with their hands and have to get creative. They have to be innovative. I mean, we joke in society about, a good repairman knows how to use duct tape or always has a roll of duct tape, right? Because you never know what you might need it for. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean that you have to know how to just think on the fly. If you don't have all the parts you need, and maybe it's not duct tape, what are we going to do, to fix whatever just broke? And I can't order the parts. And so how are we going to bypass or get around this? And so what I'm getting at is the emphasis that you guys put on innovation sounds, and it is very high tech and very progressive and forward thinking. But to me, it's just a callback to your roots of figuring things out and how to make it
absolutely
work, right? Being a pioneer, a real pioneer in things.
Without a doubt.
Tom, so you look like you had something you wanted to say.
There's so many things coming to mind, but I think on the more human side, it would be amiss to not acknowledge the difference, and maybe to share my thought, it would be that there's a lot of reasons to be safe. And I would just say the traditional industry in today's day, some of their motivators, if they're trying to get you to be safe, it's like, well, you got to be compliant so we don't get fined.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a reason.
Yeah. But Follow the rules or you'll be grounded by mom and dad. Right.
So there's a certain amount of initiative to, be compliant. But for us as an organization, to bring context to that, and it's a much different message than let's have an amazing day today, mm-hmm. and make sure that we can continue this great quality of life together.
Right.
And one of the things we need to do is make sure that we go home safe.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're doing it for ourselves and for our loved ones. Okay.
Right.
Whether that's the family at home or your coworkers that you have a great relationship with, and you're looking out for each other.
Right.
So it's no longer about the ego. It's no longer about let's take the risk when somebody's not looking.
Yeah.
Right. So at a cultural level, getting that established deep into who we are and how we operate, it's like the proper motivation, you're going to do it when nobody's watching because it's the right thing to do. Whereas if it's the avoid the police mindset, it's like, oh, nobody's watching, let's take this risk.
Exactly.
So I think to James's point, the human element or the cultural piece is by far more significant than just creating a new widget or a new innovation.
Right. Yeah. You're not driven by well, let me phrase it this way. You're saying, help us be successful in our safety and our craftsmanship, and we'll help you be successful in your home life, in your providing for your family and providing for your needs and providing the training you need professionally to go where you want to go, right? I mean, when I hear that you create your own academy, I'm sure other companies do something, similar things, but to me, that's a mark of caring for your employees and seeing their success, not just out on a job, but at home and all around. So
one other thing I think may be worth bringing up. And I think that at a very foundational level, you could take that same mindset and say, okay, why are we even in business? Right? Many people are in business for different things, different reasons. Some people are in business, so let's say the people at the top can live a very luxurious lifestyle. Some people are in business just because they want something to do. But like the reason we're in business is to provide a high quality of life for our team.
Right.
Okay. And we happen to be in the steel industry. That's great. But we also want to bring high value to our community, to society, to our country.
Right.
Right. So if there's other things, let's say adding additional components to our product offering, then we can weigh that against, hey, does it check our purpose?
Right.
And new innovations, does it make it safer? And so like our decision-making process is actually probably a bit different than a traditional company. And the way that we view the organization is it's a vehicle for people to reach their goals. So if there's a period of time where this is the best opportunity they have, that's great. If tomorrow there's a better opportunity, if that's better for them, we're supportive of people achieving their highest potential.
And you care about them, right? Well, this is a personal motto I've had for several years of I don't live to work, I work to live. And I think that could be misinterpreted as, oh, I'm lazy, I just work so that I could go play. But what I mean is I work to provide for the things that I care about. And my work I clearly care about as well, but life is about, we work hard to achieve our goals in life. That's what work's purpose for, is to help us reach that purpose, reach our goals, care for our families, care for our needs, our community, right? And so I love that sense of culture. On that note, I want to transition back. We've touched here and there, scattered a little bit about the innovation side. But now I would be remiss if I did not bring up Trackzilla. I wish I had more of a manly voice, a more radio manly voice. I probably need to for this podcast, but you guys have got to talk about Trackzilla because that just gives me some nostalgia with that kind of name.
Yeah.
We've got the Mez Master, Trackzilla, the Wall Master. Talk about Trackzilla and tell me high level, and then
Tom, you got to take
and we could go from there. Yeah,
Sure. So once again, to bring context to Trackzilla, and what is Trackzilla?
Yeah, what is
it? It is a
Trackzilla?
massive forklift that can reach 100 feet high with a net load of 10,000 pounds.
To me, it's
at
like
100 feet.
Yeah, it's like a crane and a forklift had a baby, right? You know, that's what I envision. So
to bring context, in our panelization process, which we've already touched on, historically that's been done by a crane.
Mm-hmm.
So we would set the panels with a crane. Well, there's a lot of constraints when it comes to having a panel table and a crane. All of your product has to be moved out of the path, out ahead of it, and you're very limited on the footprint that you can operate in effectively. Okay, so I'll kind of walk through the generations of our panelization process to bring relevance to Trackzilla. So we started with a crane, and you can do a relatively large panel with a crane, but there's a lot of constraints with the sequencing of it. Okay, and then we developed what we call the Mez Master, which is a forklift that can take a panel. Okay, but it can reach. We use a 2450, which means it has a capacity of 24,000 pounds, and it can reach 50 feet high. So once we started doing buildings with mezzanines in them, multiple levels, then we would use a blend of the Mez Master and a crane. Okay, and after every job that we do, we have a lessons learned meeting, and it's like, okay, what could we do to make this better? And it's like, wow, man, wouldn't that be nice if we could just set all the panels with a forklift because they're so much faster and more efficient? And so it's like, hey, let's build a bigger forklift. So once again, it was kind of a pie in the sky, fly into the moon moment.
Right.
Like, oh, that's impossible. But it's like, no, how would it be if we could set these panels at 100 feet high? Because on some of those Amazon prototypes, we would set the high roof and level 5 with a crane, and then the lower mezzanine levels with the Mez Master. And there was some inefficiencies there. And so it's like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And at first it's like, there's no way. But we got our innovation team together and they started sketching some stuff up, and we reached out to Extreme Manufacturing and they thought it was a pretty audacious goal as well. Anyway, so it just kind of evolved. And I want to say it was like from 2 years by the time there was a scratch on a napkin, this little sketch, and just an absolute far out idea to where it's actually setting a panel out in the field.
And this thing's a beast. So I'm going to try to describe it, and you can fill in the gaps where I do a horrible job here. But like, you imagine for our listeners, you have 4 tracks, triangular tracks, right? Ginormous that are what? How tall
Probably
from the
6
ground?
6 feet tall.
Yeah. And these things can do a 360, right? And then there's just this giant crane on it that can grab these things, this orange beast, this bright thing. If you're listening, just Google Trackzilla and it'll come up. You can try Google BZI Trackzilla. And this thing is just such a cool machine. It's like every little boy who's obsessed with tractors, it's like dream of having like a toy Trackzilla. You guys should probably look into that to further diversify your portfolio. Is creating Trackzilla toys for children. But yeah, it is so cool. I mean, everything from the Mezmaster, Trackzilla, your Wallmaster, InnovaCast, right?
Yeah.
Steel Tech Academy. Two last things I want to kind of touch on before we wrap up. So you mentioned kind of in the beginning the 800 acres and formed what is called the Iron Springs Inland Port.
Yeah.
And Iron Springs Inland Port, for our audiences, it includes BZI Innovation Park. It includes Savage, and now has been expanded from about 800 plus acres to 2,300 acres. And it really started with BZI Innovation Park, and is the first rural inland port to the Utah Inland Port Authority here in Utah. And I've said for years, when there was a lot of controversy about the inland port up in Salt Lake, I've said for years, in order for an inland port to be truly successful, you have to have subports, spokes to the wheel. So tell me just kind of briefly and high level inland port, what it does for businesses looking to come in.
Sure.
Just hear a little bit about that.
So the relationship with the Utah Inland Port started with us when we very first bought the property. And it was kind of interesting. At that point in time, it felt like that the whole idea of the Utah Inland Port was, it really didn't have a lot of substance to it.
Yeah,
like
what
it was
was
grasping
it?
for straws. Like,
right.
And they were running into headwinds up in northern Utah, and it just kind of felt like, and there's a minute there where it was like, is this really going to do anything? Is it really going to go anywhere? And one of the things that was significant about our project area and the BZI participation in this was that, before Ben Hart took leadership in the Utah Inland Port, and with the groups that were there before, there was a series of meetings, and it was like, well, everybody had an idea of what the Utah Inland Port was, but it had no form or substance.
Yeah.
They were talking to us about this could be really amazing, and we said, so okay, what do you do?
Yeah.
And they just kind of get this blank stare, like they couldn't articulate what they could do. And finally, we were just like, okay, you guys do you. We're going to build us a park, and we really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was more development there. There was some changes there, and they came back to us. It was after a lot of iterations of change there.
Right.
But they finally come back and they says, we know what we can do to help. And so we listened. We were already moving forward with our initiatives. We'd already secured the land. We were moving forward with or without inland port participation. Right. But Ben reached out to me and we started some dialogue. And the thing that the Utah Inland Port has really done that we see tremendous value in is, as we were going through some of the big lifts, when it comes to utility out there, there's some really heavy lifting with the infrastructure costs. Ben and the team at Utah Inland Port reached out and says, we can help. And the primary thing they helped us with was the partnership in private and public with the tax incentive programs and the Utah Infrastructure Bank.
Right.
And that was that was made accessible through the designation and the partnership with Utah Inland Port. It would have not been possible without them. And so the way that their identity emerged as a support to the local communities and to the local businesses. Essentially, Utah Inland Port come in and says, we're an accelerator for you, and we have a service to offer. Versus this idea that we've got this big idea, we want to create this place that does something, but they can't tell you what.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, their identity as an accelerator for economic growth in Utah. That's it. That's the basis of their program.
Right. And for our audience to kind of, if you're familiar with community redevelopment agencies, the Inland Port really acts a lot like a large community development redevelopment agency, wherein there's funding, opportunities, and incentives that are within the designated scope of the Utah Inland Port. And my predecessor, Danny Stewart, who did a wonderful job as the previous economic development director, he helped kind of play a role in getting a little more substance to what the Inland Port is and what it looks like, and particularly here in Iron County, the first rural inland port in the state. Yes. And so much so that the Inland Port stole him away, and that's why I'm here today. But what's beautiful is Danny's still here. He's helping with other inland ports across the state, but him and I talk, on a weekly basis and still really seeing things roll. And it's been such a huge benefit to be able to try to recruit businesses to say, hey, we've got this Utah Inland Port that helps with address some of these infrastructure needs. In fact, while, we're still working on the recruitment side and trying to bring businesses, one business I really wanted to highlight, I can't remember if we mentioned it earlier on the podcast. You guys have been working with the huge Hyundai plant out in Georgia, right? And I'm shifting gears a little bit, but I just wanted you to give our audience, we don't have to go too deep into it, but just give our audience the scope of that Hyundai project out in Georgia, how big it is and what you guys are doing and what it means for the future of your company.
Sure. So over the last 2 years, kind of a product of our pivot from the concentration with Amazon, we secured a large contract with Hyundai, building. It's a 3,000 acre development. 3,000 acres. Over the last 2 years, we've put up just short of 20 million square feet of manufacturing and warehouse structures on that.
I'm sure Trackzilla comes in handy for those kind of projects. Yeah.
It was the first project that Trackzilla debuted on. Right?
Oh, wow.
So
way to christen
it was
that,
great. But over the last 2 years, that whole development has stood up, and we've been a big participant in that project, and it's gone really, really well for us.
You've had to work a lot with Korean relations, right? And what's interesting, people may not know about Cedar City is we have a sister city in Korea and have a lot of background in some of the Korean relations. So I loved that you had this Hyundai tie, and we're kind of bringing it back to Iron County and Cedar City, even though the work's out in Georgia. To me, the doors that it opens for you as a company, but the doors that it also, I think, is going to open for us here in Iron County is tremendous. So on that note, here's kind of where I want to wrap things up with. You both talked a lot about kind of that human element, is how you phrased it, Tom. People in the community have just all of a sudden see BZI name everywhere, sponsoring things. My brother, who does planning up in Salt Lake City, he actually was teasing me that half my LinkedIn posts were about BZI. Is like, you're just in love with BZI. And maybe this is my love song during this podcast, because I've just been so impressed with BZI. But what I love is that human element and the giving back in the community. So let's kind of conclude with that. Tell me about how you like to be engaged in the community, what it means to you as a company, and where you want to see the future for Iron County and what you're doing here.
Oh, absolutely. So Tom touched on this a little bit, but we articulated as far back as 2016 that the reason we're in business is to drive high value opportunities to our team members. That is why we're in business. And so we've continued to expand our circle. This is going back to, I'm going to call it a love your neighbor as yourself philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we've just kept adding neighbors to who we can benefit, right? And it started with the team members that were directly working for BZI. And with the initiatives around BZI Innovation Park, we talked about this specifically, that we were going to overlay this philosophy over the entire Cedar City and Iron County and Southern Utah community. And so driving high value opportunities to our community is actually at the very heart of why BZI exists.
I appreciate that. And I think that goes to, you guys recently were recognized as the number one, you'll have to correct me, number one employer in Utah.
Yeah.
Tell me about that award and that ranking.
Okay. So last year, this was voted on by, so all the companies in Utah that want to participate in the survey,
Mm-hmm.
they are engaged by a third-party agency. It's sponsored by the Salt Lake Tribune, and they go through a number of different criteria that that your employees voluntarily participate in a survey, and so they're looking at what's the participation rate of your employee base in the survey, and then what's the quality of the answers on a number of different criteria. And we were recognized as the number one large employer in the state of Utah.
So awesome.
To give you a flavor of companies that participate in this, we're talking about America First, IHC, OC Tanner.
Yeah.
It's
all recognized for
and
their
they
work
all
culture,
they
right?
all made the list.
Yeah.
BZI was number one.
Yeah, I love that. And then we'd be remiss if we didn't. I'm going to have you toot your own horn. You were
boy.
recently recognized, right? You received an award recently as CEO. I'm trying to remember what the name of that award
Malcolm
was.
Baldridge Award.
Yeah.
last
Tell me
year.
what
Yeah.
Tell me what that is.
So the Malcolm Baldridge Award originated back in the Reagan era, something that he initiated, and it was about recognizing excellence, operational excellence in U.S. companies. It was built around criteria because U.S. was being beat by foreign organizations, let's say Japan more particularly. So they developed this criteria to test companies and to get companies to compete to improve their leadership excellence is the actual name of the award.
Awesome.
And so we put in with however many others that pursue this award, and I guess we won. So I don't know what else to say.
The reason why I wanted to kind of end on those couple of awards and end on the community part is to show, again, which we've emphasized really throughout this, is that culture. And so for those listening, if you want to learn more about BZI, tell them where to go. Where can they go online?
BZI.com.
Oh, that's so easy. Yeah, BZI.com. Learn more about BZI. Learn about their culture, whether you're wanting to connect with them as a business, if you want to connect with them to get involved in the community, or if you're interested in being employed with BZI. I'm sure there's lots of opportunities that they have. So James, Tom, so grateful to have you guys on. I think we could have another 3 podcasts, but great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, take care.